Welcome to Love and Hustle. We share unfiltered stories of marriage, entrepreneurship, and scaling to seven figures without losing sight of what matters most.
The raw, the real, the sacrifices, and the lessons learned the hard way.
This is Love and Hustle. Hey guys, and welcome back to Love and Hustle. I'm Brittany.
And I'm Zach.
And this is the podcast where couples, companies, and chaos collide. P.S. This is not medical advice. This is education from a pharmacist who wants creatives to feel less broken and more supportive. So let's dive in. Okay, so on today's episode, this is episode 2 of talking all things ADHD and the creative mind. And today we're going to be bringing a really unique perspective in the fact that I have ADHD and I am the creative, and Zach is actually a pharmacist by license and degree, and he's technically Dr.
Anderson.
Dr. Anderson. And yes, one of your texts called you doctor the other day. You were telling me a story and she calls you Dr. Anderson.
She does, but I don't require it. It's not
So anyways, so we're going to be bringing to this episode just a unique perspective. And I think that as a pharmacist, you play such an important role in people's lives and their medication, because you obviously have your prescribing physician and you, but the pharmacist is really this like middle person between your diagnosis and your treatment.
Correct.
And you're such an important role for people to understand how medications work, how the side effects are, like all those things. And I almost feel like in some ways you have even a more deeper understanding of that than even the prescriber.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, that's very true. I think we're much more accessible to the general public. So it's easy to walk into a CVS or a Walgreens and talk to your pharmacist if you can pull them away. And we are drug experts. That's what we're trained in. We may not be diagnosticians. I can't look at your labs and tell you what you have. But once I get a diagnosis, I can pretty much tell you the best options for treatment. And I think we're a good resource in today's environment because a lot of people get their information from the internet. And while there's a great deal of good information out there, there's also a ton of terrible information. And we are really the filter of that. And it's a struggle in the healthcare field today because we have to fight against a lot of misinformation and poor information that's out there. And even a lot of influencer people who have audiences of millions of people. They might have an opinion on something or a personal experience, and they cast it out there to their followers, and it can be misleading at times. So I really wanted to be a part of this episode to kind of be a voice to those creatives out there who are suffering from something like ADHD or anxiety or depression, and really acknowledge the fact that it's a real thing. It's not something that's in your head, and that there are options out there for treatment, whether it be via medicine or through other avenues. I do believe that adult ADHD is a real thing. A lot of my colleagues would argue with me to that fact. So I may be an outlier in the industry, but there's a lot of reasons why I think the general public is suffering from ADHD, and creatives especially, because of the way their mind works. They suffer from ADHD, and Britt's going to touch on this a lot, and that they have so many great ideas and they just really can't figure out which one to focus on or how to focus that energy. And what I can offer in the way of advice or medication as a pharmacist really is just helping you to focus that. And it's not diluting or changing who you are on a personal level. It's just helping you to kind of get to where you're trying to go.
I think that's like a huge misconception with just medications in general. You're like, oh, I'm going to take this and I'm not going to be myself. And so there's an actual avoidance to the prescription therapy because of your belief around how it will change you, when really, in fact, ADHD is not a lack of focus. It's simply a lack of being able to regulate that focus. Mm-hmm. It's not a lack of creativity. It's a lack of how do you execute that creativity. And so for me, something that I have learned is, because I had ADHD for so long.
And you were untreated.
And I was untreated my entire life. I literally was not diagnosed until I was 36. So I developed a very strong set of like coping mechanisms that I have now learned, like that execution, that being able to execute the creative ideas, those coping mechanisms were essential. And so many people cannot like gain the right focus to be able to develop those coping strategies.
Yeah, and I think this is where a lot of my colleagues would land and say most adults are capable of developing structure and systems within their life to cope with ADHD and therefore do not need medication. And while I agree with what Brittany is saying, she was forced into this as a child because she didn't have an alternative option, so she had to build these structures and systems, and that is tremendously valuable. However, medicine is there to help you along that path. And if you can use both structure and a medication supportive mechanism, then you can be even more powerful and effective. I would argue that if you looked at some of the most successful people in the world, they are people who suffer from ADHD, but who have developed systems and processes to effectively focus that energy. And that's why they're so successful. They just outperform everybody else. They're more creative, they're more productive, they're more determined. So both play a role. And I'm not saying that medicine is going to replace what Brittany has had to do her entire life. I think you need to do both. And I think it just will make you be exponentially more effective and better at achieving your goals.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that there's a big stigma around taking the medication. And, you know, I think even my perspective as a nurse, like, okay, you have diabetes, you're going to take insulin, right? You have high blood pressure, you're going to take your blood pressure medications. And it's amazing to me how people who have ADHD want to avoid taking the medication. And so I think a big thing to realize is that it's real and it doesn't make you any less worthy of treatment just because it's in your brain and it's not something in your bodily system, right? And so there's this avoidance because of that factor.
Yeah, there's a massive stigma in the industry around pain management and adult ADHD, and they're both looped in together under a drug-seeking sort of mentality. And if any pharmacists are out there, you're probably going to feel some kind of way about this. I hate that this stigma exists in society at large, but even in the industry, it doesn't make any sense. Pain is also something that is experienced in the brain. Psychological things such as ADHD, anxiety, depression also are experienced in the brain. You cannot look at somebody and say to them, you don't suffer from pain, you don't suffer from anxiety. Only that person can really tell you how they feel. If that person is taking pain medication or ADHD medications in order to be more productive and help contribute to society, who am I as a pharmacist to stand in their way? Like, that is not my job. My job is to be supportive and to assist them in feeling good enough to be productive for their families, for society, for everybody at large. So I just don't understand that opinion. If you're a pharmacist out there and you have that opinion, please drop a comment. I would love to engage with you.
Well, and I think too, I will say, like, obviously me being a NICU nurse, like we could record an entire podcast episode on prescription drug abuse because I witnessed the most devastating results of prescription drug abuse with a baby withdrawing from drugs. It is horrible. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, yes, that exists, but I also think, and there's been some really incredible movies and documentaries created about them, there is a huge part of that side of medication that is dark. And there's a lot of prescribers that are facilitators and enablers in that. And I think that that's where a lot of that pharmacist background where he's referring to comes from, is that, you know, there is this side of prescription drug abuse where a lot of opinions are formed, but instead of stepping back, I think, and taking like a 360 view of like, how did we even get here to begin with? Mm-hmm. A lot of it goes back to the prescribers. So anyways, that's a topic for another day. A juicy one. Do you remember the movie that we watched recently that was recorded here in Tampa or in...
Yeah, I don't remember the name, but it was there was a pill mill era that was really prevalent across the country, but it affected the Sarasota, Naples, Tampa area really strongly back in like early 2009, 2010. And OxyContin was a big portion of that, and drug reps were going around and selling it to doctors or pushing it to doctors for like headaches when it was.
I think it was called pain hustlers.
Pain hustlers, yeah.
Yeah.
And the drug reps were making hundreds of thousands of dollars and taking doctors all around the country.
Yeah, and it's wild. Like it was recorded over across from Tampa, over in like the Clearwater area, and I mean,
I was coming out of school in that time, and I was an early pharmacist, and it was gross, and there was a significant abuse problem then. We live in a different era now. I will say there's still some abuse, but even if the number of prescriptions that come to me, 20% were abuse and 80% are legitimate, the massive majority are legitimate scripts. So to turn down everybody and use things like, oh, it's unavailable, it's on back order, we don't do that, which is a common thing you'll hear if you're trying to go and fill your ADHD medication as an adult. That's frustrating. I do think that there needs to be honest conversations. If you are an adult with ADHD and you're struggling to find a regular pharmacy, you really need to speak directly to the pharmacist. Hope that they're open to engagement, having discussions, be honest with them about your diagnosis and your struggle, and see if they can take an active role to keep it in stock. Most of the time, it's not on back order. It's just frustrating, but you really need to develop the relationship.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like, like in the photography world, you have a relationship with your lab, right? Like with your medication, you should have a relationship with your pharmacist. And I think that it's wild to me but I get it because at the end of the day, it is your license. Okay. So when you go to CVS, your prescription is not being overseen by CVS's license. It's actually being overseen by Zach's license. So if anything happens, Zach is liable for what happens with your medication. And so the pharmacists have the right to actually refuse filling prescriptions for that reason. But where it becomes very gray, and what Zach is referring to, especially with his colleagues, is that the personal beliefs around the diagnosis and around the treatment and the personal experiences with prescription drug abuse allows them that power to deny filling prescriptions. And you have always been, you've always shared with me like stories and things, over the years, and it's absolutely freaking wild to me. And then I go in these Facebook groups and I see these moms posting like, hey, does anybody know where I can get my medications? I've gone to 4 pharmacies. And I'm like, this is insane. Like people cannot get the treatment that they need when they've been ethically diagnosed. Yeah. So anyways, all that to say, so in general though, people with ADHD, it's not a lack of focus. It's a struggle to actually regulate the focus. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about that in depth, more specifically with the creative mind. So one thing is that ADHD is oftentimes misdiagnosed as anxiety or depression. Mm-hmm. And share with us a little bit about like that perspective.
Well, I mean, again, in children and in adults, the presentation is often different. Kids struggle to verbalize.
And even gender is different as well.
Kids, they struggle to verbalize how they feel, and oftentimes it manifests in behavioral disturbances, or the whole like ADHD component, the hyperactive component, is really what stands out from a hyperactivity perspective with kids, oftentimes with young boys. And I find that almost misleading, because most ADHD diagnosis, it's not some kid running around crazy and can't sit still. It tends to be an inattentive presentation, or a struggle with grades, or a struggle with focus, or daydreaming, or doodling, and failing to stay on task. And the anxiety and depression component can be secondary to that, because they feel guilty that they're not doing well in school, or that they're disappointing their parents, or that their friends are excelling in something that they're not. So then they develop anxiety about going to school, or anxiety about testing, or depression about poor performance. or fear that they're going to get left behind and their friends are going to move on to the next grade. So there becomes this consortium of issues, especially with kids who can't verbalize it. Now with adults, it can be a completely different manifestation because we tend to be able to, we've developed our prefrontal cortex in a way that children have not, and we can regulate ourselves. We can come up with other methods and systems to cope where kids can't. So the presentation in adults tends to just be disorganization, failure to complete tasks, leaving things around the house.
Yeah, I think that people with ADHD, like there's this belief that they're
lazy, disorganized.
Yeah. And it kind of kills me because I remember experiencing that as a child. Like, oh, like, why are you not capable of doing this? And it's like, now I look back and I'm like, because literally my brain could not like organize how to execute that, you know?
I want to tell a little story because this is like going back to, I mean, the love and the hustle of relationships. But when I first started dating Brittany, or when we were living together, no, it's small little things that used to really bother me and irritate me. But like, I could get up in the morning and leave to go to work and come back and almost guarantee that the milk was going to still be on the counter from when she made coffee in the morning.
It's probably on the counter right now.
It's probably on the counter right now because she will literally go in, she'll make the coffee, and then rather than, she's got to walk past the refrigerator when she leaves the pantry, but she will invariably leave the milk out. So I make her coffee every morning so that I can be sure that the milk goes back in the refrigerator. It's just little things like that.
Yeah.
That I now understand are just part of a lack of focus. She immediately is like, oh shit, I've got my coffee. Now I got to go start getting ready for work.
So another thing I'll say that I now understand is I remember my staff there was a day where somebody was they were like, I'm not going to touch that pile over there. And I was like, why? And like, they all kind of looked at each other like, because that's like a Brittany pile. And I'm like, what's a Brittany pile? Like, what does that mean? Yeah. And they were like, well, you have this tendency to like, clearly you were trying to do something. Like I can look at it and I can tell that there was something in your mind that was trying to organize this, but what it was, I'm not quite sure. Like you can't identify the organization. You can just identify that there was something of organization that happened there. And when that was pointed out to me, I started to like, I came home and I was like, oh my God, that's like a Brittany pile over there. And there's like a Brittany pile over there. And then, but to me in my mind, that was so normal. Like I looked at it and I was like, that's organized. Like that to me was organized. But to everybody else in the room, it was like, no, but we're also not going to touch that because it clearly was serving a purpose in your mind.
It was, yeah.
So, but you know, ADHD, like I think that when it comes to the creative mind, it's not a lack of creativity, but it's quite literally like you are drowning in it. You are drowning in your creativity and you don't know how to actually organize and create the function. And that's where medication can really come in and support you.
Yeah. And I think to one of your other things you touched on in the last episode, you have to, one of the structured systems that Brittany has built is she has to write stuff down. And I think the process of writing it down, putting each letter onto paper, forces her to like grab onto that idea and firm it up into a plan of action. And if she doesn't do that, that just vaporizes in her mind as if it is gone.
No, it like literally does.
It's kind of like waking up in the morning and having a great idea or a dream. And if you don't immediately write it down, somebody asks you what you dreamt about 5 minutes later, it's gone. And that's the ADHD mind all day long. So just like, imagining how frustrating that would be. You're
like, it vaporizes into nothing. No, it like actually really does. There will be times that people will say something to me and I'm like, I don't even remember that.
All the time.
And now, okay, so here's the other component, especially for the creatives that have children. Okay. I learned this from one of my clients who she's a physician. She's a PA and she does like general practice, but she said to me, she's like, what you don't realize is that she's like, you've had at the time, I think I had 3 children, and I was in the thick of Chloe, like sleep deprivation. And she's like, sleep deprivation exacerbates your symptoms. Mm-hmm. You actually, and this was like leading into my diagnosis or right after. And she was like, yeah, your symptoms are probably 10 times worse than what they were pre-kids. And it's why you're now like those coping strategies are like not working the way that they were, because now you're also doing that in conjunction with sleep deprivation. So if you are a creative who has struggled with this, and on top of that, you've had babies who are disrupting your sleep, it actually is making your symptoms worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll add this for women in general because of hormonal fluctuations, and then you throw pregnancy on top of that, which is a massive hormonal fluctuation. All of that can lead to sleep issues as well as just general psychological changes. So I think ADHD in that pregnant, like mom category is even harder to manage. A lot of moms feel guilty about medicating themselves when they're pregnant.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of confusion. I have to deal with a lot of questions around those lines. And it's a gray area because nobody wants to come out and say, oh, yeah, sure, you can take that while you're pregnant. So it ends up being a risk-reward analysis that you go through.
Yeah. And hopefully you have a physician who's really willing to get into that conversation of risk-reward, because from the perspective of us both having medical background, nobody wants to put their license on that. It's why, like, So I also was a lactation consultant at one point in my career, and there is so little data on medications and breastfeeding, and there's so little data because nobody wants to take the risk. Nobody wants to take the risk of how it affects that baby, not just the individual. So then you step back and you're like, okay, I remember I cared for a baby in the NICU who was born prematurely. This baby was extremely malnourished. Well, the mother suffered from an anxiety disorder that resulted in an eating disorder, and she literally was not taking the medication and not providing the proper nutrition to her body to provide the proper nutrition to that baby. Mm-hmm. And that's like where you get into this conversation of the risk reward, because you're like, okay, well, either way, we're coming out on the other side with a really terrible scenario. Mm-hmm. So which is the better option? And it's really unfortunate that there aren't studies. It's really unfortunate that they're, and I will say I have an incredible OB-GYN who's very, she critically thinks very well, where a lot of physicians kind of want to just like take their hands off of it and just be like, oh, I don't want to touch that, Whereas she will have very intense conversations like that of, and so if you are being faced with somebody who isn't willing to even entertain the conversation, go get another opinion, because, you want to be under the care of people who can critically think. You want to be under the care of people who are not going to literally look at you on a sheet of paper, but look at you as an individual and all of the complexities that come with that, and be able to critically think through that risk reward scenario.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's just not a lot of data. Most pregnant or lactating moms don't want to participate in clinical trials to give the scientific community that sort of information. Fair. So a lot of people are kind of lost because there's just not solid information. So you do have to undergo that risk reward analysis and talk about dose reduction or temporary changes to the medication regimen. But ultimately, there is a path forward.
So I want to talk about burnout, because there's definitely a, component that comes with being a creative, being an entrepreneur. It's all the conversation of like burnout. And my personal feeling is that burnout is actually normal. That I think, I've done this now for 10 years, and I also was a nurse for, over 6 years. And I reached a point of burnout. It didn't mean I didn't love what I was doing. It didn't mean but I do think that burnout is a natural thing. And there's a lot of like anti-burnout, anti-hustle conversation that almost makes people feel like if they're experiencing burnout, then they're doing something wrong. And that it is a natural thing that happens. But more specifically, when it comes to ADHD, most creatives that do have ADHD, a lot of that burnout is coming from the fact that they haven't learned how to manage their ADHD.
Yeah, I was going to jump in and say, I don't think it's a necessary thing. I don't think everybody needs to reach a point of burnout. I think it's a sign that you haven't focused your energy or developed a system or a set of structures that allow you to achieve your goals without burnout. And ADHD is just going to make it that much harder because you're going to have so many different things flowing through your head. Being able to grab onto one idea or even the right idea, because you can focus all your energy and effort on one idea, but if it's the wrong one, you're still going to reach burnout.
But to like go back to that, I think that in general though, I think that what you are saying is a natural component of being an entrepreneur. You're going to go down paths
that are the wrong paths.
And you're going to be like, ugh, this sucks. I kind of hate this. And it's almost like it's mislabeled. It's almost like the word is used in a way that is like so negative. Whereas I think it's a natural thing. But I think to go back to the conversation around ADHD, people with ADHD who haven't been diagnosed or aren't treated or haven't developed those coping mechanisms experience burnout at a much heightened rate than somebody who has. Mm-hmm. So, I really like just sort of allowing people in the room who are listening to this and have experienced burnout and think they may have ADHD, or maybe you do, but you've never actually treated it. This is kind of that like wake up call of maybe that is part of it. Maybe it's not because you hate your career path or you're just over it or you just can't stand these clients or, whatever. You're reaching this point of like, this doesn't work. I don't want to do this anymore. Maybe there's another side to that.
Yeah. And I would say you're an example of someone who has developed these systems and who, not to throw you out there, but who has also now found medication assistance. And you still have achieved a level of burnout throughout your career. So even with all of those things in place. So I would agree that it is something that's going to happen over the course of your entrepreneurial journey, probably more than once. And it's just going to be a sign that, hey, either this is no longer the thing that interests me most and I want to change my area of focus, or this doesn't serve me the way that it used to and I want to find a different option as well. And I think that's part of evolution. I mean, that's the journey.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but here's the thing in entrepreneurship, right? When you are an entrepreneur, you are like the CEO of your business, your job is to manage yourself. And if you are struggling to manage tasks, you're probably struggling to also manage yourself, which is part of the burnout component too, is that focusing, is that regulating, is that self-management. And so recognizing that you're not necessarily like you, the burnout is not necessarily the problem. It could even be just the treatment of the problem.
I think this is something that I keep seeing a lot in these books that I'm reading, but most of the advice I am getting is that to achieve your most successful version of yourself, most of your attention needs to be on yourself, on improving and being healthy and working out and getting into the right mindset. That is half the journey.
Yes.
You could probably, if you said an 8-hour workday is what you focus on yourself and all of those self-help sort of things, meditation, working out, eating right, for half of that, 4 hours, and then you get solid focused work for the other 4 hours, you'll achieve your goals way faster.
Yeah.
People around you will be more motivated. They'll be more supportive. They'll feel more autonomous in their own activities, especially if you have a staff. Like, we're finding that when we hire the right people and we point them in the right direction, we can not only be less present, but we achieve our goals faster. So it's very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. But back to the whole medication thing, I think there's a fear that medication will take away your creativity. And if anything, it actually gives you more of a container. It gives you more of the ability to be an artist, but to like steady your brush and to create more of a system of strategic execution in that creativity.
Yeah, I would say that's 100% correct with adults. The fear and the stigma of giving medicine to your children, I think, touches on a different thing. And there's a lot of fear and concern that medicating children is going to change how they are and how they act. And they're so young and their brains are still developing. So I can definitely understand some of the stigma around that. We've struggled with that as well on whether to give our son medication at all or even every day.
Yeah.
And we've seen that he is just more effective at school when he's on the medication and while
at school.
And then he's still himself when he's home. So it's
really interesting too, because Maverick, one of Maverick's good friends, has ADHD as well. Their symptoms could not be like their polar opposite symptoms. Maverick has zero physical expression of his symptoms. It is all in his head, and it's more specifically when it comes to reading. Whereas his really good friend, you could just actually watch him and tell that he has ADHD. And his mom was sharing with me how it is a very physical expression of what is happening in his brain. Whereas Maverick, you would not know by watching him that he has it. And so it's a little bit harder because from the perspective of being a parent, how do you see that the medication is helping him when you can't see it on the outside?
Yeah, the only physical representation we can see is in grades, and that's a struggle. And we have supportive care beyond the medicine. So it's much different from the child perspective and the adult perspective. And that's one of the things that ends up being a interpersonal decision when you're trying to assist your kids with ADHD. I think advocating for them for additional support in school, extra time, the opportunity to hear things read aloud versus reading them themselves are tremendously beneficial.
Yeah.
And then if all of those efforts are not achieving the desired outcome, then a low-dose medication option is a prudent option.
Yeah. And it's funny because like just even hearing you say that, like going back, I remember I shared about it in the last episode. There was a semester where literally we went from a class of 100 nursing students down to 80 with one exam. And y'all, I remember I went into the teacher's office and I could like cry like thinking about this because this was like a huge moment in my like college. Like I almost flunked and I sat there and she's like, well, hold on, let me grab my, let me like swallow this tear that I'm like, but she's like, let's look. She's like, they're dropping questions. So after the exam, you were allowed to petition that questions were not fair. And I went into her office and I remember I sat in that freaking office and she could read a question and I could answer it. But if I read it on the test, I couldn't answer it. And it was like infuriating because here I didn't have a diagnosis to be able to take an exam verbally versus taking an exam written. Mm-hmm. And they dropped. I would have failed, but they dropped a question. And like, literally, like, can you imagine? I was in school for like 3 years. Like 3 years of my life was about to be completely washed down the drain from one question.
Yeah.
Like one question.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways.
Can only imagine the anxiety and the fear.
Yeah.
And all of that.
And then it's like also too, like you come back to your parents, like they're paying for you to be there. You've worked so hard to get to this point. Like
the guilt and all the other emotions that come. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an incredible thing.
And so to be able to like, to hear, you know, like to now see with our son, these testing accommodations that are being provided for him and, you know, to realize like to see those accommodations for him and to look back on my school years and be like, that would have changed everything for me. I would have been in a completely different place in my life. I would have, if I had had that. So I think like for the parents that are listening to this and hearing the perspective of somebody who was a child and didn't have that support, to now with a child who does have that support, like advocate for them, create that space where they can thrive, and, really being attuned to what that is. So, whew. This is a heavy episode, but I will say, for me, it's heavy. But I will say I had several people reach out to me after the last episode being like, I felt so seen. So many things that I wish people in my life understood about me. You said, hearing your husband be compassionate to you and understanding of those things. Yeah. And I think it's important. And I think that's why we're recording these episodes and giving the perspective of being not just a person with ADHD or a person with a child with ADHD, but also a partner. Mm-hmm. So that's the whole point. Love and hustle. Yeah. So hyperfocus versus healthy focus, because I realize that when I love something, I can hyperfocus. And it's how I've been able to thrive as a photographer, because I love what I do. I love what I create. So that superpower, especially like even going back to Maverick, like we know Maverick loves creativity. He loves building. He loves drawing. He can just completely immerse himself in that. But you give him a book and he's like, no thanks. Right. Mm-hmm. And so being able to understand where your hyper focus can be turned on and off. Right. And then knowing where you can't turn it on at all. And so that's where I take my medication when I know I'm going to have to force myself to turn it on. And so for me, like when I go to the studio and I have shoots all day, I don't need to take my medication. I can get into a flow and it just happens. And I don't need help organizing my brain in that sense. But when it comes to doing admin work or doing my design appointments, yeah, I need somebody to help me. I need that medication to help me stay focused. And so also realizing like, where is your superpower? Where can you turn it on and off naturally? And where can you not turn it on at all? Mm-hmm. And that's where, medication is such a beautiful thing, because unlike a lot of medications where you have to reach a therapeutic dose, with these medications, can you list off a few for people who are listening?
Well, yeah, I mean, most common ones you'll see are Adderall, Vyvanse, the Ritalin, Concerta, methylphenidate-based products. And then you'll see some of the non-controlled medications like Strattera, more often seen in kids. And then you'll see clonidine as a secondary option to kind of help kids settle down at night and help them go to sleep. Most of them work on serotonin, norepinephrine, or dopamine, or a combination of all three. Methylphenidate products tend to be better suited for children, whereas the amphetamine-based products like Vyvanse and Adderall tend to be better suited for adults. However, you'll see lots of kids on Adderall and Vyvanse. Biggest thing to look out for with kids on those is appetite suppression and difficulty sleeping, because they are natural stimulants. Another thing to keep in mind when you're exploring medication options is there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. Everybody's brains work a little bit differently, and you kind of have to find the best option for you specifically. A doctor or a good pharmacist can kind of explain how each one works and what the likely side effects are in the general population, but everybody's side effect profile is going to be pretty unique to them. Also, when you start a medication or start several, it's important to give it adequate time to see if it's going to be the right one for you. Taking 1 or 2 doses is not a long enough duration to really know if it's the right thing. We usually recommend 2 to 3 months. If that's not possible, going at least 1 month with a lot of these meds is going to be far better than 1 week. And then if you make a change, make one small change at a time. So a dose change, go up or down on one medication, not on multiple, or if you're going to stop and change therapy, just change one medicine at a time. Otherwise, you really don't know which of those changes was the right one if you do notice a benefit. So just make small incremental changes. And there's going to be a right combination for everybody. So just sometimes it takes time and trial to kind of get there, but I've seen tremendous success when you just make small incremental changes over time.
Yeah. And I think one, just like getting over the fear in general of like taking the medication, but then two, like working with your prescriber to find the right medication. Mm-hmm. I never say it right.
Yeah, you're on Adzenys, which is a new orally dissolvable amphetamine-based product.
Yes. And I don't take it every day. I take it when I know I need it and I know I need to focus. And so it's not something that I would say I probably take it a couple times a week.
Mm-hmm. And when you take it, do you notice a significant benefit? Yes,
I definitely do. The other thing too, and it was funny because we kind of wrote some talking points, is being able to focus on the right task. And there was a time that I took Adderall, and that was actually one of my major like drawbacks of it is I felt like a vegetable on it. I felt flattened. And I also felt like I didn't have a personality, but then I felt like I would find myself focusing on like the wrong things, like all the time. Like I would hyper focus on something that I can't naturally hyper focus on, but it would be like the wrong thing. And it was like, it didn't channel me right. Whereas now I feel like, and maybe this is just maturing because, you know, like I've like become more aware of myself and my tasks at hand, but I'm able to focus on the right tasks in a way that I still have a personality. Like I still feel grounded in like myself. I don't feel medicated. I just feel more intentional and purposeful in my actions on Adzenys. Yeah. So anyways, I think that we can wrap up this episode. I have really loved getting to hear your perspective, and I hope that this episode really empowers those who maybe haven't been diagnosed to seek out a provider to help them, support them. Those who, you know, maybe have been diagnosed but haven't found the right medication, that they talk with their pharmacist and, you know, find the right medication and the right dosing. And then, of course, just giving people the power as a creative and a parent and all those things to become the best version of who they were meant to be.
And if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments and we will do our best to let you know what's going on.